The Prime Minister is capping off his whirlwind international trade trip with a stop in Tokyo, where today Mark Carney and his Japanese counterpart signed deals meant to expand the bilateral relationship.
We have much in common, and we're enriched by each other's cultures, perspectives, and histories. This is a strong foundation on which we can build something even better, more prosperous, more ambitious.
Meanwhile, Conservative Leader Pierre Poilievre made his own overseas trip this week, his first as leader of the opposition. He made stops in the UK and Germany, meeting with politicians and business leaders. Here's a part of his message to a crowd of UK Conservatives.
The state took from the hardworking many to enrich the privileged few. It's not that the government left working people behind. Rather, it priced them out and shut them out altogether. Net zero policies drove energy and food costs up and paychecks down, all to fill the pockets of green grifters. Protected monopolies shielded from competition keep prices high. Corporate welfare enriched insiders at taxpayers' expense. Gatekeepers blocked home building, resource development, and infrastructure, shutting workers from jobs and youth from homes.
Our party insiders are here to talk about these two trips. Greg McEachran is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. Greg, I'm going to start with you. A big part of the first leg of the Prime Minister's trip to India, part of this reset of the relationship with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What do you make of the reset there, and what are you watching for going forward?
Well, I look at Mel because, when the information was revealed about actions on Canadian soil, action on the United States, was when it was around when we were sitting at a table like this. So that is always, I think, for a lot of Canadians, going to be in the back of our minds. But we also have had to adjust, and I realize I'm sitting across from someone who lives in D.C. and works in D.C., Katie, to what things are like under Donald Trump. So it's pretty remarkable. I do think sometimes we have a habit in Canada of looking outwardly about how what we're doing and how it's like Canada. We forget to look at this perhaps from the Indian perspective, and the fact that Prime Minister Modi is not as powerful as he was a couple of years ago. He was supposed to do spectacular in his most recent election. He did not. It's basically a minority. He's got his own political challenges there as well. So we don't know what happens behind closed doors, but there might have been some space to meet in the middle that is, recognizes both Canada's situation right now because of the United States and Modi's political situation.
Given, you talk about the situation in the United States and the instability sort of like fueling the why that these trips are taking place. Mel, do you think that, the Carney government has done enough to perhaps assure Canadians who might be uncomfortable with going forward, deepening ties with India, before sort of concrete answers about what happened are out of the murder trial?
I would say no. I don't think that they've done a good enough job. And I would say not even just with the situation with India, but also as it relates to China. I think that there's a lot of people who have serious concerns. And I think the Liberal government and the Prime Minister are operating on a belief that people are so worried, to your point about what's happening in the U.S., that they're open to deeper relationships with countries like India. And while that may be true, they are not interested with deeper relationships at all costs. So I think that that's a delicate balance that the Prime Minister has to walk, that I don't know that he's been necessarily doing effectively. And not that it has necessarily sparked outrage from people in the country, but I think people are waiting for, where's the reassurance? What is the Prime Minister saying to not just community members who are impacted? We saw a lot of those stories. My good friend Jagmeet Singh was, part of one of those stories. So more than just community members who feel worried about a deeper relationship, but also just the rest of Canadians who are a little bit worried about what that could look like without reassurances that this isn't continuing to happen, this isn't going to happen again, and cleaning that up a little bit, because so far we haven't really seen the Prime Minister do that in a way that I think makes people feel that that this is being taken seriously.
Fred, what do you make of it?
It's interesting. In normal times, this would be the headlines, right? That he's going to India, and it would be about the trial. If he goes to China, it would be about human rights. Those would always dominate in normal times, but we are not living in normal times where I think Canadians are giving him a lot of leeway here and a lot of expectations to go get things done, to get our products to market and to diversify our trade. So he's kind of fitting into that. I think, I don't, maybe they're not explaining it well, probably not, but I'm not even seeing it, right? It's a lot of people, I think it's getting missed because we are so focused on the U.S. relationship and the trouble that's bringing us right now.
Broadly, and I'll go around as well, but broadly, I'll start with you. What do you make of the Prime Minister's overall trip? Even though it was sort of focused on so many different things, or so many different news events took place while this was happening that no one was planning for. What do you make of the Prime Minister's mission, and do you think it was successful?
Well, it looks like he's walking the walk, right? Like we've all been talking about all the stuff the announcements he's been making, the Davos speech, but he has to get out there and actually make these deals and get these things going. And if products start shipping and if we are diversifying our trade outside of the U.S., it's going to be a success. Now, these are announcements that are happening this week. How long do they before they start being implemented, and how long before Canadians start feeling it? But it looks like he's doing the job he's been elected to do.
Greg, what do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. India, that massive amounts of investment, two ways. Australia, really interesting things around critical minerals. It kind of, if you look at India, it seems to be the most concrete. There is stuff on the table. Australia was more around announcing partnerships, more in terms of Japan around meetings, and it's automotive, it's agriculture. I think that's all really, really good. Fred has pointed out the political challenge is how long before people start to see that. But there is a bit of an absence on the domestic front of things that they also could be talking about. And it doesn't have to be the Prime Minister. There's some really great things that this government has accomplished as a government that wanted to move quickly, but I don't hear a lot of people talking about them. In February, C-19 passed with collaboration from the Conservatives. It's a bill around grocery prices, improves GST, essentials. I would be having someone else talk about that. One of the things that I hear about a lot is the increase to salaries for military. If you're entering the military, you're starting off, in Canada, we're ahead of the UK. We're a little ahead of the US, or almost the same. We're behind Australia. Australia has always done that really well, but we're not talking about the fact that the Prime Minister promised to make things better for those men and women serving in CAF, and they have, because he seems to be the primary spokesman. And don't get me wrong, he's excellent at this. But Justin Trudeau was a really effective spokesperson. They put him out on everything, and he was effective until he wasn't. So one of the things I remember with the Chrétien years is that there were people in that cabinet, from John Manley to Sheila Copps, that covered the gamut, the spectrum of who supports the Liberal Party. And again, this is a government that had to really hit the ground running. I'm not sure they're going to get the chance to catch their breath before next summer to look at things like that, but I hope they do.
Mel, when you take a step back and look at the Prime Minister's trade mission, do you see there was success there?
Right. I'm going to pick a little bit on both of what Fred and what Greg said as well. We heard throughout the election that Mark Carney was going to be the man who could stand up to Donald Trump, the man who had the relationships internationally, who was best placed to kind of elevate Canada to be a little bit more serious and to reestablish our position on the world stage. I think if you're looking at where he's traveling, I think if you're looking at some of the announcements coming out of that, I think you're saying, he's doing a good job. He's the person who he seems to have kind of positioned himself to people. I think, to your point, the domestic challenges, the cost of living stuff, I don't think that has caught up to him yet, because people are still giving him a lot of leeway. People are still giving him a lot of opportunity to see the buck follow the announcement that he's saying. But I think the longer it takes for people to see a real impact in their life, and the more they hear the Prime Minister talk about industry and reinforcing our economy and on the world stage, I think the more people are going to start asking themselves, okay, but what about me? How is this making my life better? These sound like good things, but I'm still not seeing an impact. So I think the balance and making sure, be it the Prime Minister, be it somebody else from that cabinet, you're going to start seeing some of that friction, and it could be an opportunity for the opposition to take that up and be the party that stands up for like you say in French, Monsieur, Madame, tout le monde.
Yeah, one of the things that when these kinds of announcements are made, it does take some time. Like if people are looking for new markets and people are looking to get their products out there, it takes time to establish relationships. It takes time to establish supply chains, and so these things they just do take time. Yeah. The Prime Minister has been asked repeatedly over the course of this trip about Canada's stance on the war in the Middle East, and when asked whether he would rule out Canada's participation if the conflict or the hostilities broaden or escalate, this was his response.
You've asked a fundamental hypothetical in a conflict that can spread very broadly. Today's events, recent events, point to that. So one can never categorically rule out participation. We will stand by our allies when it makes sense. There's a distinction between the offensive actions that were taken and are being taken by the United States and Israel, that were taken by them without consultation with Canada, with other allies, and we're not party to those actions. But we will always defend Canadians. We will always stand by and defend our allies when called upon.
Fred, I'll start with you. When we take a step back with this week of messaging from the Prime Minister since this war started, what do you make of how the Prime Minister has sort of tried to deal with it?
It's been something, because it keeps changing. He came out very strong and very fast when the conflict started, and I thought it showed real leadership there. And then he kind of waffled on it and walked it back a bit. And I'm guessing there's a lot of heat within that Liberal caucus. You've got to remember, this caucus was mostly elected under Justin Trudeau. This was mostly his team that Carney inherited, and I think there's a lot of different views there that may not quite fit with Carney's views, and I'm betting he's getting some heat from that. But for him to walk in and then to take on a hypothetical and then to go that far to say that, not ruling it out, like he's when you're making these types of statements, you got to be very, very clear, and he has not been in some regards, the way he's contradicting himself, and that's a recipe for trouble down the road on this.
Greg, you are deeply connected. I know that you are very well aware of what some in the Liberal caucus might be thinking or feeling. What is the sense that you're getting after sort of the message that has come from the Prime Minister?
So I would take it even further than just the elected folks, the staff as well. So I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses, but look, I was ice fishing last weekend and woke up in the middle of the night and saw my phone that this had happened. So I think this probably would have been a much cleaner communication effort had the Prime Minister been in Ottawa, surrounded by his staff, Foreign Affairs. But again, I don't want to make excuses, but I would put it under, in my previous conversation with you about, perhaps in the summer when these are the things that you need to look at. This government, the Carney administration, really wants to make sure it is seen different than the Trudeau administration. And one of my criticisms of the Trudeau administration on this panel was their lack of priority on communications. It seemed to be done off the side of senior folks' desks. And you can't handle it that way. That is not the way to do it. As a comms person, a lot of times I don't pass judgment about why reporters ask a question. You don't spend a lot of time in that. You think about the answer, as Fred said, avoid hypotheticals. But one of the things that I know was given back to them in terms of how the press galleries are reacting, because this starts to be a theme, and it feels like sometimes that the attitude towards communications is one of the few things that is carried over. And I would highly recommend that they not do that. And I think there are some people around the Prime Minister, right after it was revealed that there was a conversation between President Trump and Mark Carney, and then it turned out that it was actually Trump that called our Prime Minister, yet it was being revealed by one of his cabinet secretaries. To me, that's a lost opportunity. I think Canadians deserve to know. It doesn't have to be every day. I think you can over-communicate. You can put people out there too much. But I think I'm hoping this was a bit of a learning experience for them, challenged by the fact as well that they were on the other side of the world when it was happening.
On that point, in terms of the information coming from the Carney government when it comes to Canada-U.S. relations, there's been a complete change from the Trudeau government to this government, trying to get confirmed information from the Prime Minister's office about what's going on, about who's talking, what came out of those talks, and that kind of information. As a reporter who covers that, I have had a very difficult time trying to get concrete answers about things, and I think it's a definite shift in tone and it is whatever strategy they're doing, that's their business. But as, as a reporter that's trying to get information to try and inform the public about what is going on, what possibly could change, and those kinds of things, I know it's kind of a challenge. But I suspect the calculation is because Trump is so volatile and because I do know, based on my reporting, based on some American sourcing, is that the Americans don't want to see these talks play out in public, even though we see so much from the Trump administration in public. Like Donald Trump will hold a news conference, or it's not even a news conference, he'll just invite the press in, and you can get those opportunities to ask him questions. And same with his, senior officials within the Trump administration. But I know that based on my reporting through conversations with sources, that the Americans were frustrated with a lot of the details that were coming out in the public during the time around Trudeau. So I suspect that is behind the shift. It still makes it incredibly difficult as a reporter to try and get at it.
Katie, if I could just add to that, there is also a deep awareness from Liberals that at a certain point, Conservatives started blaming Justin Trudeau for the problems with Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't like Justin Trudeau. That seems ridiculous, but for a long time, that was a talking point that sailed through unchallenged. And so there's a high awareness that the Prime Minister of our country does not want to be in the situation Doug Ford was in a couple of months ago, where you're the lightning rod for everyone's anger because, rightly or wrongly, you're being blamed.
I want to ask Mel about the messaging, but is it your perspective that that it was inaccurate to say that Donald Trump didn't like Justin Trudeau?
Look, when do we want to? When Justin Trudeau was taking, Ivanka Trump to Come From Away on Broadway, I think Donald Trump liked Justin Trudeau very much. When the First Lady is looking at Justin Trudeau very adoringly, I think that says a lot. From one day to the next, Donald Trump can have a variety of opinions, I believe.
Okay. Mel, I want to ask you about how you think that the Carney government has handled the messaging around when it comes to Canada's response and Canada's positioning when it comes to what's gone on in Iran.
Yeah, I think similar to what Fred and Greg had talked about on this, but also similar to what we talked about earlier on the relationship with India. When stuff like this happens, it is so important to be delicate and thoughtful with everything you say. So when you're not consistent and when you're not holding close to the thing that it is that you're trying to say, you're at once confusing people, you're angering people without needing to, and if you're not being consistent in your message, then you're upsetting everybody. You're not making anybody happy. And when you talk about conversations, or when you're talking about how it relates to the U.S., figuring out who the audience is for the Prime Minister's message this week was really difficult. I couldn't figure out who he was talking to based on how that was changing, and that's not good for anybody. I don't think it's good for the relationship with the U.S. I don't think it's good for how Canadians feel about it, and that's not helpful. And when you see the Prime Minister, and I don't want to compare what's happening to other international relationships, but when you see the Prime Minister prioritize deals with countries without necessarily saying this is bad, we need this repaired, I think people start giving you a little bit less leeway on how diplomatic and how responsible you're taking something. So when your message shifts, I think that makes it even worse. And I think that's what we saw a little bit this week, and it uses up people's confidence in a way that's not helpful.
Okay, we have two more subjects that I want to talk about, and I want to get to both of them. So really quickly, Pierre Poilievre did do his first foreign trip as an opposition leader. What do you make of how he handled it?
I thought it went well. It's an unusual thing. I'm not familiar with leaders of the opposition going on world tours, but I think this is the time to do it. We're all talking about, the big issue of the day is getting out there and increasing Canadian trade. So, talking to promoting LNG to Germany, and talking about Kanzuk, which is a policy that Conservatives have been championing for quite some time, I think is productive and helpful, and he's trying to look like a Prime Minister in waiting. It's tough when you're leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister is out making major splash with big trade potential deals, but it's something to try to get into the battlefield about what we're actually dealing with as Canadians right now, and not so focused on the other issues that he's been talking about for the last few years.
Greg, what do you make of it?
I think that there was a spin ahead of it that he wanted to be collaborative with the government, with the Prime Minister, and a lot of what he said while he was there doesn't seem like he's living up to that, so it didn't last very long. He's been leader for 3.5 years. It took him a very long time to do this. There are times. Brian Mulroney was elected leader of the Conservatives in '83, and then that year went to Washington, had a very, very successful series of meetings as opposition leader. We know that acid rain and then free trade were the big issues. That's a case where it can actually help you. I'm not sure this time it did, other than give him some press that he went overseas.
Mel?
Somebody who's trying to look statesmanlike, this is how you do that. I think this is the first real tone shift we're seeing from the Conservative leader, despite talking about it for the last year. I think this is his attempt at doing that. I thought the clip that you showed was a little bit funny. It sounded a little bit like something a New Democrat would say when you're talking about working people and taxing the ultra-rich or the ultra-rich taking on too much. And when he had the opportunity to do exactly that, he didn't. But outside of that, I think that this was his attempt at looking a little bit more like a Prime Minister, because we haven't really seen him do that since the election.
We're going to do one quick whip around here about the new polling. New federal polling shows the Liberals maintaining their lead over the Conservatives. This is a snapshot of some of the most recent numbers. All of these firms have the Liberals up, with some showing quite a commanding lead. The latest Angus Reid Institute poll has the Liberals up 13 points, while new numbers from Leger have them up 14 points, sitting at 49%. That's the largest lead the Liberals have had in 10 years. Our party insiders are here to weigh in. Greg, is it time for Mark Carney to go to an election?
I sat through 2024 with some really rough polls. I think, yes, the Conservatives should continue to call for an election. No, just kidding. But I will add one thing. Bruce Anderson tweeted earlier to watch some poll that Spark Advocacy is doing. Mm-hmm. And what I'm watching is the approval rates of this government in Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Okay, Mel.
Polls go up, polls go down, but you take a look at trends, and that trend is, I think, good news, obviously, for the Prime Minister and the Liberals, and bad news for everybody else that was listed on that. So this would definitely be to the Prime Minister's benefit to keep those numbers up, and I think everybody else has to pull their socks up and do a little bit of work.
Fred, what do the Conservatives need to do in this moment?
Wait a couple of years. That's probably the best
What? Fred
strategy.
doesn't want an election? What do you mean?
I think an election would be a very bad idea for everybody. I think there is risk to the Liberals if they go and call an election without a reason. They're just
Ask
because
David
they're
Peterson,
up. They're up 15 points or whatever it is, without a story, without things are moving through the House now, right? Bills are getting passed. Legislation is getting done. So there's no necessary reason for an election. So for him to have that story to tell him why he needs one, I think he'd have a hard time. He could have an incident like in 21. I was a national campaign manager for the Conservatives when Trudeau was way up in the polls during the pandemic, called an early election, didn't have a narrative for the first 2 weeks on his own, and we caught up and tied it up and made it a race. So it would be a very big risk for the Liberals to take, despite what the polls may say.
Okay, party insiders, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday. Greg McEachran, Fred Delory, and Melanie Richer, thank you so much.